full committee, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
I think the chairman, here's how it works. ICE sends a detainer to the local sheriff or the local police chief and says, hey, if you're gonna release this migrant who we know is here illegally, who's been accused of some crime, if you're gonna release him, give us a heads up. Give us 48 hours before you're gonna release him, give us a heads up. And they do that because that protects everyone. It protects law enforcement resources. It protects the public from letting a guy out. It protects law enforcement when they go to arrest this guy out on the street, if they can do it in the jail or in the local facility, much better. And frankly, it protects the illegal migrant. And how do we know all that? Because it just happened in Denver not too long ago. Denver's a sanctuary city. I sent him a detainer. Well, they had this guy in custody for 310 days. I sends him a detainer. The Denver, because of their sanctuary city policy, says, no, we're not going to give you a notice. We're going to send you this. We'll give you notice like 1 hour before. And they release the guy to the streets. We actually have the form where it says stamp, release to, and there's a blank. They write in the streets. And then law enforcement goes to arrest him. And guess what happens? Law enforcement officer gets hurt, took resources, money to do that when they could have just went to jail because they had to send more agents. And it hurt the migrant himself because they ended up tasing this guy. When they could have just kept him in the jail, ICE comes there, goes from the jail to handcuffs him to take him to wherever they're going to take him. But no, we can't do that because we're a sanctuary city. And now it's gotten even worse. Now if you're a sanctuary state, they come after law enforcement like Sheriff Wagner, who's trying to do the right thing. Use the resources in a proper way, protect the migrant, protect law enforcement, protect the public. No, we're a sanctuary city. We're going to release them to the streets, even though they had a detainer months before that said, just give us a heads up and we'll come down and do it the easy way. That's why this sanctuary city policy, sanctuary state policy is so darn ridiculous. So I appreciate the chairman having this hearing. I appreciate our witnesses, particularly law enforcement, who we have here on the front lines of this every single day. Thank you all for what you do, and I yield back.
Yields back, Chairman Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, are you familiar with the Department of Homeland Security Immigration Detainer Notice of Action form? You familiar with these forms?
I've heard of them, yes.
Yeah, okay. And these forms, down about halfway down the page, it says, it is therefore requested that you, this is going to local law enforcement, requested that you notify DHS as early as practicable, at least 48 hours if possible, before the alien in your custody is released. All right? Is that partisan or is that just common sense?
It depends on who you ask, but it is common sense.
The ranking member said we need to function in a bipartisan way. I don't think that's partisan. That's just saying, hey, you got a bad guy, at least someone who's been charged with crime in your possession. He's also an illegal migrant. Can you give us a 48 hours heads up before you release him to the streets?
Sure.
That makes sense to me, right? I don't think that's partisan. I think that's just common sense. Mr. Hallman, are you familiar how this form works? This detainer process is supposed to work? Yes. All right, the next line says, maintain custody of the alien for a period not to exceed 48 hours beyond the time. Again, we're requesting you do. They're not demanding. We're just requesting you help us out. Law enforcement, working with other law enforcement to protect the safety of law enforcement and, of course, the public at large, beyond the time when he or she would otherwise have been released from your custody to allow DHS to assume custody. Again, that seems like common sense to me. But sanctuary policies prevent these two requests from taking place. Is that right? If you're a sanctuary state, sanctuary city, you don't comply with these. You may give them we're going to give you a 10-minute notice. We're going to release them and then tell you we already released them. That's how it works in these sanctuary cities, in these sanctuary states. Is that right, Mr. Hammond?
That's correct, too. It's even interesting, too, under the Biden administration, you have a lot of state and local law enforcement who think that they're not going to comply with ICE based on their experiences under the Biden administration. ICE had policies in place that made it so hard for enforcement and removal officers to actually work with these jails.
Yeah.
They made it next to impossible. So you have all of these jails that think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to comply. I may get penalized if a state puts an aggressive restriction on that. But everything is going to be streamlined. They want to comply. It will be a good process.
Yeah, let's put up on the screen. Are you familiar with the name Abraham Gonzalez, Mr. Hallman? Do you know this guy? Abraham Gonzalez?
I do not.
Okay, this guy was released this year, February 28th, 25. He was released. Look at what the sheriff's department put here. This is a ICE notification. They put the stamp on there, being released to the streets. Now, this guy had been in custody for 345 days. And ICE had sent this very form asking, hey, can you give us a 48-hour heads up before this guy who was charged with aggravated assault, charged with stealing an automobile, charged with menacing, can you just give us a heads up? And guess what Sanctuary City, Denver did? They called him 1 hour before, and ICE couldn't get there, and they released this guy to the streets as they stamped on the form. Now, what I find interesting, can we put that back up again? What I find interesting is under the section flag, see it over there on the right-hand side? It says he's cleared, but then look what it says, violent to staff. So the very people who released him to the streets knew this guy. He'd been charged again with aggravated assault, stealing a car, but he'd also been violent to the very people in the jail who were holding him, and they still wouldn't give notice to ICE. And then, as I said in my opening statement, this guy is released to the streets. ICE goes out to arrest him. Officer gets hurt. They had to tase the guy, so the migrant gets hurt. Tell me how that is not, tell me why that we should have that kind of policy happen, Mr. Hallman.
Well, we shouldn't. It doesn't keep our communities safer in any sense. And again, what they're trying to do here is they say, hey, at least we tried. An hour, heads up, or whatever. But how can they look at that man to release him on the streets, knowing the crimes that have been committed, knowing that risk? How can they say, hey, we'll see you later, as he goes off and could potentially commit another crime down the line? I mean, is it worth it to instill trust with the immigrant community? How about, the citizens, and how about the harm that they could face due to the unknown of releasing a dangerous criminal alien to the streets?
They knew this guy had a propensity to be violent to law enforcement because he had done it in their very jail, and they can't give federal law enforcement a heads up. Sheriff Wagner, would you have given him a heads up?
I think in that circumstance I would.
Yeah, you certainly would, but for people who do what you would do, you're now getting sued for that, right? Your attorney general is coming after you.
Yeah, and as the gentleman over here said, we should stay out of local business, right? And so here I am with the state attorney coming down on me for trying to juggle the whole mess.
Because that's how law enforcement, you're supposed to work with other law enforcement when you can, not violating the Constitution, just be in good common sense way to make sure people are safe, law enforcement safe, public is safe, and frankly, as I said before, even the migrant is safer when you do it that way, when you do it the common sense way versus the Sanctuary City way. And that's what we really have to, I think, that's really the decision here. Common sense or Sanctuary City way. I think common sense wins out every time. With that, I yield back.